something else about moving to a new place. New opportunities, a new chapter in life have just begun. Only positives, in my opinion. And what else is positive is that Darksiders 3 has finally been released. Roughly about a month ago, I know. Sorry about the delay, moving, gotta set everything up, blah blah blah, whatever. Plus, I like to take time to enjoy what I love, and I love Darksiders, old fan, and believing that there wouldn't be a third installment in the franchise as THQ went down. I felt a pain, I felt a great disturbance, and I believe that every single fan felt the same. So when THQNordic showed up and brought and ballooned forth a third, well, trust me, we were all pretty excited. So, while this game may have come out last month, I believe that I should take this as an early Christmas present. So, let's jump straight into it. Woo. Alright, so I doubt that if you've had any interest in Darksiders 3, the fact that this game is getting a hard time by both critics and fans should be known by now. And it really pains me to say it, but it is sadly earned. Though not to the extreme that some of the disappointed fans are trying to make it out to be. So please understand that I will review this game both as a fan, but also as a critic. I will try my best to be as objective as possible. The reason for why this is difficult is because I'm a big fan of the franchise, and the two previous installments I love. Yes, they had their own problems. It felt like the developers didn't really know what they wanted the series to be. The first one being like a Zelda homage, and the sequel, they built up in a loot system and more open world, several worlds that you could explore. So it felt like they went on the right track to find out what Darksiders was supposed to be, and that's why many of the fans, me included, felt such a sadness that the series was so underrated. And when we heard that Darksiders 3 was coming out, we believed that yes, this will be the game that lifts it up into popularity that we believe it deserves. But not like this. What happened? Oh, okay, let's just jump straight into the narrative. Where War was sent out to clear his name and Death's journey to resurrect mankind, the third horseman, Fury, gets a mission from the Force Masters, the Charred Council, in hunting down the 7 deadly sins. And so, with the help of the Watcher, the sister of the Watcher, the horsewoman goes on her quest. So, firstly, great premise, and different from her brothers, where they had more of a personal journey. We actually get to see now a bit more of the professional side of the Force's job. Secondly, I really like the dialogue for Fury and the female Watcher, which in turn makes me like our protagonist. She's quick to anger, jumps straight into action, and has growth throughout the game. And that's pretty much it when it comes to the positives. The 7 deadly sins, while capturing them as an interesting premise, really do not have any true impact on the story. Most of the time you just kind of stumble upon them, and even then they seem inconsequential. An example, avarice, or greed if you will, has no build-up. He quite literally shows up, says some lines, a boss battle occurs, and that's it. Out of the 7 sins, only 3 of them have any intrigue about them, and you only talk to them once or twice before the character's conclusion. And that's also the case with every single secondary character. An introduction and an ending. There is no meat to develop them, to make you care for these individuals. I can't really talk about anyone specific because as they really have only 2 scenes with them, it would be a spoiler to their own stories. It's pretty ridiculous. Another thing that is pretty bad is that while I enjoy the written dialogue of Fury, the writing itself is not that good. Several times our hero would state stuff, again, would we supposed to go into the specifics, that she either shouldn't know or have any reasons to say. And her character development doesn't feel earned. She starts out not caring for humans, or any life form for that matter, yet she eventually starts seeing something in them, even when the game gives us no interaction on why she starts to change. Aside from a few lines on how humans were pretty smart with their weapons and architecture, the way to fix this would simply be to actually have more scenes between the many characters and our lead lady, rather than just an introduction and a payoff. So overall, the narrative of Darksiders 3 is sadly not that good. Though let's face it, the entire Darksiders franchise did not earn its many fans because of the story. It's interesting and I personally like it, hence why I made my war video. It's the gameplay. So, when THQNordic said, hey, let's bring this series back from the dead, Obviously the developers would play it a bit safe, go with the gameplay style that the fans fell in love with, right? Oh boy. I have no idea on where to start. This review is really late, so I guess you may have already heard some of the biggest criticisms already. They have taken 1 step forward, 2 steps back. They simply jumped on the Dark Souls clone bandwagon. I'm not going to go into the similarities this game shares with the just mentioned one, but let me state this. As a Darksiders fan, this is not what I wanted. As a critical player, the gameplay is just meh. Let me explain. Where the first game were somewhat of a mature Zelda clone, Darksiders 2 started to add a more open world with a loot system, a tech tree to change up your playstyle, while still holding the puzzles, items and dungeons and areas that the fans fell in love with from the first game. Here, however, they took away everything that made this series what it is in terms of gameplay and decided on being something completely different. There is no loot system, ability tree, or dungeons to explore, just one linear world with a leveling system where you can improve your health, regular damage output, or magical power. The combat system looks and feels simple, but there are some hidden depths where you have your whip and your secondary weapon you earn with Fury's different elemental forms called hollows, which is probably the most interesting gameplay mechanic in this game, as the forms will allow you to traverse the world differently, have specific secondary weapons and magical attacks. But while this sounds all dandy and good, the combat feels off. Almost as if developers perfected the gameplay for 1 versus 1 combat, but the second there are a bunch of enemies on screen, you can't be creative with your combos or even feel a certainty while playing, which is a shame. The dodge you are given does not feel reliable at all, and no, I'm not saying that it should be as overpowered as War's block mechanic, but here you just have one method of getting out of danger. So of course I end up spamming it as every opponent attack constantly, and their attacks go through your own, again taking away your creativity with the combos, and the camera is so zoomed in that enemies behind you will take cheap shots from behind, as the indicators are so bad at giving you information that you end up hating fighting enemies, when this is now the primary focus of the series. Which is a shame, because I genuinely like the combat when it's one-on-one. It's fun, but against a bunch it feels like a chore. Darksiders 3 is also more unforgiving when it comes to the difficulty, which is fine, I like a challenge, but when the majority of deaths feel like it happens because of something that I couldn't control, like the camera going haywire or enemies popping out of nowhere, it made me consider not wanting to reload the game, which can have something to do with the weird checkpoints littered around. But considering that the combat is the primary challenge in this game, there is no real true difference when it comes to the gameplay. Puzzles are almost non-existent, and when you do come across them, you'll simply laugh at how easy they are. Remember, they've taken away items you gain from dungeons, so now you only have your hollows and one really lousy ranged weapon that you'll almost never use in combat. So, most of the puzzles have something to do with these bugs that you can throw as they act like bombs. Great. The bosses have also gotten a mediocre rep, but let's be honest, most of the bosses in this entire series have been pretty average, with a few exceptions. My only true big criticism here is that the second you realize how powerful your flame hollow dodge counter is, you can get through every boss with that cheese, as that's how they are made seemingly. Have strong attacks that you can learn by heart, then counter. Seriously, some bosses ended up being so easy that I was shocked at the difference between those battles and the regular ones. The developers are already working on updating some of the problems when it comes to the PC port, and by extension some of the problems like the hard to see combat indicators, etc, but you can't patch in ideas. For example, you don't have a map or a minimap. This was probably decided on so that the player would look around the world and explore, which makes sense. You don't want your consumer to watch an arrow on the map constantly, right? Well, if that's the case, why do we have a compass here that shows us exactly where to go? Maybe they realized that without it, it would be impossible to know the way to the next sin, as the writing does not give you any proper direction. But it comes across as if they really didn't think thoroughly on it. Which I hate to say, because I have no clue on what they were thinking, though I guess that's all I can do. Ask questions and be negative, which I sadly have been almost through this entire video. Sorry about that, I guess it simply comes from a good place. I am a fan of the series after all, and I want it to be as good as it can be, yet the problems here are just so weird. Like, you can upgrade your whip by finding certain items and damage output by leveling up, but you never feel any difference while playing, aside from seeing a bigger number. And you have no reason to explore earlier areas where the weaker enemies are, so yeah, just weird. So is negativity the only thing that can come out of this game? No, actually. The story might be a mess, and the gameplay may not feel as well planned out, but if there's one thing I can wholly recognize as being good, it's the presentation. While the graphics isn't that game-changing, the art style and design are just stellar. Fury looks awesome, the way the modeled her is just fantastic, way better than their comic book appearance in my humble opinion. The 7 deadly sins are all a joy to look at, making me wish we could actually see more of them, or have them be a bigger part of the story. That can be said about almost every single secondary character, to be honest. The only thing that looks a bit drab is the world. It all look a bit samey, but it's not bad. What else is not bad at all is the sound side of things. The voiceovers are all good, not once did I laugh or cringe at the work that was put into it. The sound effects are, well, not that memorable, good while playing. And the moment I heard the main theme when booting up the game, I knew I was in for something special. Speaking soundtrack-wise, of course. Musical themes are fantastic, though sadly they do vanish in the background because of the action and sound effects, so I probably should change some of the setting to adjust the volume, but after listening to the tracks online, all I can say is that I truly enjoyed Chris Velasco's score. So that's pretty much my review of Darksiders 3. There are more stuff I could talk about, like how throughout the entire game there are no dialogue options like in the second game, except once, which is pretty weird. Fury is supposed to be like the mage of the horsemen, yet she just have one magical ability per hollow form. There are many enemies that can use range attacks and you only have one option to deal with them, aside from running up and, you know, hack and slash them, but your range options are so limited and it's really weak, so you can only throw it once. And so much more I could talk about, like how Vulgrim and no. The story is full of inconsistencies, stuff that doesn't make sense, and plot holes. The gameplay doesn't feel that well planned out, with a somewhat deep combat system that you can't really explore because of the enemies. Again, it feels good 1 versus 1, but against a bunch of enemies it just becomes a hot mess because of the technical difficulties, like the camera being zoomed in, and the combat indicator also, you can't see it that well. You have the compass or the radar showing you exactly where to go, but you don't have a mini-map. There are so many problems. Hence why I will give this game a dark side of the franchise out of Darksiders. It's like the black sheep of the family. As a fan of the franchise, I'm disappointed. Looking at it from a critical standalone side of it, it's mediocre, being pulled down with all of its technical PC port difficulties. I became a fan of it again because of the gameplay, so if they decide with the 4th game, the future, to follow the footsteps of this one, I can't really consider myself a fan anymore. So let's cross our fingers for the future. But until then, I'm KingJGrim, or the guy being surrounded by Christmas decorations. Seriously, you guys have no idea. It's insane. Whatever you prefer, and I'll see you guys next time. Where's my... Oh yeah, that's right. It's supposed to be 10 hours later. Whoops. I mean, it's empty, so...